Rain hit the glass wall of my living room in sheets that night, the kind of California storm that makes the hills look like they're bleeding mud down toward the coast. I was standing in the kitchen of my own house in Emerald Hills, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes earlier, when my sister Chloe walked in without knocking on a door that technically belonged to me. She had her phone in one hand and Julian Drake's jacket draped over her shoulders like a trophy. "Starting tomorrow," she said, not even looking up from her screen, "Julian's parents are moving into the master suite. If you don't like it, you can pack your bags." I set the mug down on the granite counter. Slowly. I wanted her to hear the sound of it. "This is my house, Chloe." "It's our house," she snapped. "Mom and Dad would have wanted us to share everything. You just got lucky with the tech thing. Victor and Cassandra lost their place in Sacramento, and Julian says family takes care of family. I want you to understand something before I go any further." 2 hours before that conversation, at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, I had signed a $4,200,000 all-cash purchase agreement with a commercial acquisitions firm called Halden Meridian Group. Wire transfer confirmation was already sitting in my email inbox. Possession clause, as is, physical handover within 30 days of signing, buyer's discretion on timing. My sister had no idea she was about to give away a house that no longer belonged to either of us. My name is Elena Vance. I'm 36 years old, and for 12 years I told myself that loyalty to my family meant absorbing whatever they threw at me. That night, standing in my own kitchen listening to my 24-year-old sister hand my bedroom to strangers, I finally understood how wrong that instinct had been. Let me back up. I built my first company out of a rented studio apartment in Palo Alto when I was 24, the same age Chloe is now. Supply chain software, unglamorous, profitable. By 31 I'd sold my stake for enough to buy the Emerald Hills property outright, 6 bedrooms, a smart glass sunroom, a private vault room, where I kept server backups and documents from 3 different ventures. Our parents died within 8 months of each other, my father from a stroke in March, my mother from what the doctor politely called a broken heart that October. Chloe was 20. I moved her in with me the week of the funeral and told her she'd never have to worry about rent, food, or stability again. She didn't have to worry about much of anything after that. That was the problem. Julian Drake showed up 14 months later, at a wine bar in Santa Monica, introducing himself as a wealth manager who structured private equity deals. I did what I always do before letting anyone near my family. I ran a background check. 2 collections accounts. A dissolved LLC in Nevada with a pending judgment against it. No active licenses with FINRA or the California DBO. I told Chloe. She told me I was jealous of her happiness. Within 6 months, Julian was sleeping in my guest room for nights a week. Within 9, his parents, Victor and Cassandra Drake, were showing up for Sunday dinners uninvited, walking through my house like appraisers at an estate sale, commenting on the square footage, the view, the market value of Emerald Hills real estate, which had climbed 18% in 3 years according to the county assessor's office. I noticed things. I'm good at noticing things, it's the same instinct that built 2 companies. I noticed Victor asking my housekeeper, Martha Reyes, detailed questions about which rooms had the original deed paperwork. Martha had worked for my parents since 2004, then for me. She was 61 years old, and she was the only person in that house who still called me by the nickname my father used, Lenny. On September 9th, Martha found Julian standing outside my private vault room at 11 at night, trying door handles. She confronted him. 3 days later, Chloe fired her, screamed at her in the driveway, called her replaceable staff, told her Julian's mother would be handling the household now. Martha stood in the rain with 2 suitcases and 31 years of dignity, and I watched from the upstairs window and said nothing. I didn't say nothing because I was weak. I said nothing because I was already building a case. That same week, I quietly moved Martha into a 2-bedroom apartment in Culver City, paid 18 months in advance, no explanation required. I told her one thing, don't ask me why yet. Just trust me a little longer. Then I called Marcus Sterling. Marcus had handled 2 acquisitions for me, and 1 messy dispute with a former business partner. He was the kind of lawyer who answered calls at 9 p.m. without complaint, because he understood the difference between a client with a grievance and a client with a plan. "I need you to pull county records on Victor and Cassandra Drake," I told him. "Sacramento. Anything involving property, liens, or civil filings." 3 days later, Marcus sent me a 19-page document. Victor Drake had been named in 2 separate real estate fraud complaints between 2019 and 2022, one involving forged refinancing paperwork on a rental property in Elk Grove. Neither case had resulted in criminal charges, but both had ended in settlements. Combined, the Drakes owed just under $1,500,000 to creditors and a private lender who had already filed a notice of intent to pursue judgment. They weren't moving in because they liked my sunroom. They needed an asset. Specifically, they needed my asset, with my name off the title and their names, or Chloe's, on a fresh mortgage application they could use to satisfy that judgment before it became a lien on everything they owned. I sat with that information for 6 days before I made a single move. On October 14th, I had my home's smart security system quietly re-audited. On October 16th, Marcus flagged 3 separate documents that had gone missing from my home office: my property tax statement, a notarized copy of my trust, and, strangest of all, a blank medical power of attorney form I'd never signed. I asked Chloe about it at breakfast. She looked at me across the kitchen island, buttered her toast without missing a beat, and said, "Maybe you should be more organized, Elena." That was the morning I stopped hoping she'd choose me over him. 2 hours later, in my home office, with the rain just starting outside, I opened my laptop and forwarded a signed letter of intent to Halden Meridian Group. Cash offer, no contingencies, 30-day closing. I didn't tell Chloe. I didn't tell Julian. I didn't tell his parents packing boxes in Sacramento. I told exactly one person, Marcus, and I gave him a single instruction. "Draft the closing paperwork," I said. "And find out exactly which day the Drakes are planning to move in. I want the locksmiths there first." That night, standing in my kitchen while Chloe told me to pack my bags from a house I no longer owned, I smiled at her in a way she mistook for defeat. She had no idea what was coming through my front gate in 3 weeks, or that by the time Victor and Cassandra Drake's moving trucks reached the end of my driveway, there would be nothing left for them to move into at all. Marcus Sterling called me at 7:12 a.m. on October 21st, and the first thing he said was, "You need to see what showed up in the county recorder's database overnight." I was still in the kitchen, the same counter where Chloe had told me to pack my bags 9 days earlier. I put him on speaker and set my coffee down. "Someone filed a quitclaim deed request," he said. "Using your name. Notarized signature, dated 3 days ago, at a UPS store notary in Culver City." I hadn't been to Culver City in 3 weeks. I hadn't signed anything at a UPS store in my life. "They're trying to move ownership before your sale closes," Marcus said. "Someone forged your signature to transfer partial interest in the property to Chloe Vance. If it had gone through cleanly, they'd have had a documented ownership claim to fight the Halden Meridian sale in court, or at minimum stall it long enough to renegotiate." I sat down. Not because I was frightened. Because I needed a second to feel the exact shape of what my sister had let happen inside my own house. "Who caught it?" I asked. "The county flagged the notary's registration. She's not licensed for real estate instruments, only general documents. It's a rookie mistake. Whoever coached them through this wasn't as careful as they think they are." I already had a guess. 3 days before that call, Cassandra Drake had asked to borrow my printer. I'd said yes because refusing something that small would have told her I was paying attention. What I didn't mention was that my home office ran on a network system that logged every print job by device and timestamp. On October 18th at 2:34 p.m., someone printed a 9-page document titled Grant Deed, Quitclaim, from a laptop registered to Julian Drake. I hadn't looked at it that day. I looked at it after Marcus's call, sitting alone in my office with the rain long gone, and the California sun doing nothing to soften what I was reading. The document listed Chloe Vance as recipient of a 50% interest in the Emerald Hills property. The grantor signature line had my name typed in a font that didn't match any signature I'd ever produced, notarized by someone named Denise Okafor, whose license, according to the California Secretary of State's notary database, had been issued for general affidavits only, never real property transfers. It was sloppy. It was also criminal. Forging a property deed in California is a felony under Penal Code 470, and knowingly notarizing outside your authorization carries its own civil and licensing consequences. I didn't call the police that morning. I know how that sounds. But I'd learned something in 12 years of building companies with people who wanted to take them from me. The moment you go public with an accusation, your opponent gets to control the narrative of their own defense. I needed the Drakes to believe they were still winning. I needed them comfortable enough to keep making mistakes. So I called Chloe instead, and I asked her to lunch. We met at a restaurant in Manhattan Beach, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a view of the pier, somewhere she used to love when we were kids and Dad would take us there for birthdays. I ordered her favorite, the seared scallops, before she even sat down. I know things have been tense, I said. I want to fix that. I miss you. Something in her face softened, just slightly, and for one moment I saw the 12-year-old who used to fall asleep in my bed during thunderstorms. Then Julian texted her. I saw the screen light up, saw her glance down, saw her expression harden back into whatever version of herself she'd built around him. Tense, she said. Elena, you've been distant since Mom and Dad died. Julian's family has done more for me in a year than you have in 3. They've done a lot for themselves too, I said carefully. Victor and Cassandra have some financial history I think you should know about. She laughed, short and sharp. You hired someone to investigate my boyfriend's parents. That's insane. That's controlling. This is exactly why Julian says you can't let anyone else be happy around you. I asked her, gently, if she'd signed anything recently. Any documents. Anything Julian or his parents had asked her to sign, for the family. Her eyes moved, just for a half second, toward the window, toward the parking lot, toward anywhere that wasn't my face. No, she said. Why would you even ask that? I let it go. I paid the bill. I hugged her outside the restaurant and told her I loved her, and I meant it, even while I understood with total clarity that my sister had either signed something without reading it or had known exactly what she was signing. Later that night, Marcus sent me the notary's registration log, a public record request that took him 4 hours to obtain. Chloe Vance's name appeared on it. Not mine. My sister hadn't forged my signature herself. She'd sat in a UPS store on October 18 at 2:41 p.m., and watched a woman named Denise Okafor notarize a document with a forged signature belonging to me, then signed the witness line herself, using her real name, without asking a single question about whether it was legal. That was the moment phase 2 ended for me. Confusion had turned into something colder. 2 days later, Victor Drake asked to see me privately, in what used to be my father's study. He'd taken to using the room like it already belonged to him, papers spread across the desk, a legal pad covered in numbers I recognized instantly, refinancing calculations, loan-to-value ratios, projected mortgage terms against a $4.2 million valuation. Elena, he said, leaning back in my father's chair. I think it's time we talked business, family to family. Chloe has an ownership interest in this property now. It only makes sense to formalize a joint refinance, pull equity, and help everyone move forward. Cassandra and I have some opportunities that need capital. What kind of opportunities? I asked. Investment opportunities, he said, too quickly, too smoothly, the way a man talks when he's already spent money he doesn't have. I looked at the legal pad again. At the bottom, in his handwriting, was a number circled twice, $1,480,000. Almost exactly the figure Marcus had found in the Sacramento judgment filings. I'll think about it, I told him, and I watched relief spread across his face like he'd already won. He had no idea that 4 days earlier, on October 19, Halden Meridian Group's attorney had confirmed something that would make every calculation on that legal pad worthless. The sale wasn't closing in 30 days like the original agreement stated. It was closing in 9. And Victor Drake had just told me, in his own handwriting, exactly how much money his family had left to lose. By the last week of October, I had stopped eating dinner with them. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't announce it. I started working later at the office in Culver City, coming home after 10, when the house was quiet and Julian's parents had already retreated to the guest wing they'd started calling our side of the house. Chloe noticed. She texted me once, just 3 words, "Are you okay?" And I stared at that message for 11 minutes before I typed back, "Fine, just busy," and put the phone face down on my desk. I want to be honest about something. Isolation didn't feel like punishment during that week. It felt like relief. For the first time since Julian Drake walked into my sister's life, I wasn't performing patience at a dinner table while Victor talked about family opportunities, and Cassandra rearranged my mother's china in the display cabinet like she was already planning the estate sale. I used that distance. Every night I wasn't at that table, I was in Marcus Sterling's office on Wilshire Boulevard, going through documents. On October 24, Marcus laid out what we had. The forged quitclaim deed, notarized outside Denise Okafor's licensing scope, with Chloe's real signature on the witness line. The print log from October 18 tying Julian's laptop to the document. County records showing 2 prior fraud complaints against Victor Drake in Sacramento County, both settled without admission of guilt, totaling $1.5 million in restitution obligations that had never been fully paid, the remaining $1,480,000 balance now under a private lender's judgment with an active collection timeline. And the closing calendar for Halden Meridian Group, now locked for November 2, 9 days away. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. "I had someone pull employment and licensing records on Julian Drake specifically. He's claimed to be a wealth manager to you and your sister for over a year now. I already knew he wasn't registered with FINRA. What I didn't know, until that folder opened, was that Julian Drake had been terminated from a financial advisory firm in San Diego in 2021 for what his former employer's internal complaint, obtained through a public regulatory filing, described as unauthorized client fund transfers under investigation. No criminal charges had followed. The firm had quietly let him go and required a signed non-disclosure agreement in exchange for not pursuing restitution publicly. Julian Drake wasn't just unlicensed. He had a documented history of moving other people's money without permission, and nobody in my house knew it except me and my lawyer. "Why hasn't Chloe found this?" I asked. "Because she's never looked," Marcus said. "People don't investigate the people they're in love with. They investigate the people they're afraid of." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. On October 26, Martha Reyes called me from her new apartment in Culver City. She still checked in twice a week, out of habit more than anything, and that night her voice had an edge I hadn't heard from her before. "Cassandra came by my old post office box," she said. "Asked the clerk if I'd left a forwarding address. Said she needed to send me my final paperwork. I never gave that woman my forwarding information." I felt something shift in my chest, cold and immediate. Did the clerk give it to her? No. But Elena, why would she care where I went? I'm nobody to that family. I didn't tell Martha the real reason that night, because I hadn't confirmed it yet. But by October 27, Marcus and I had pieced it together. Cassandra wasn't looking for Martha out of curiosity. Martha had witnessed Julian outside my vault room on September 9. If the Drakes were building a case to challenge my ownership or contest the sale in court, they needed to discredit or silence any witness who could testify to Julian's behavior inside that house, starting with the one person who'd already been fired for seeing too much. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a family conflict and started treating it like litigation. I met Marcus again on October 29, 4 days before closing, and for the first time, I asked him the question I'd been avoiding. What happens to Chloe in all of this? He didn't answer right away. Legally? She signed a false document as a witness. Whether that becomes a criminal matter depends entirely on what you choose to report and when. Personally? He paused. That's not a legal question, Elena. That's yours to answer. I thought about the girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I thought about the woman who told a housekeeper of 20 years she was replaceable staff, while I watched from an upstairs window and said nothing. I thought about a UPS store notary stamping my forged name onto a document, while my sister stood there and signed her real one beside it. I decided something that night that I hadn't fully admitted to myself until I said it out loud in Marcus's office. I'm not protecting her from the consequences of this, I said. I'm making sure the consequences land on the people who built the trap. Not the ones who fell into it. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we need to move faster than they expect. On October 30th, 3 days before the Halden Meridian closing, Marcus filed something I hadn't authorized in advance, and didn't find out about until the confirmation email hit my inbox at 6:15 p.m., a formal notice to the county recorder's office flagging the October 18th quitclaim deed as fraudulent, alongside a sworn declaration from a licensing investigator confirming Denise Okafor's notary authorization did not extend to real property instruments. The deed hadn't fully processed yet. It hadn't clouded the title. But the moment that notice hit the county system, it created a permanent, time-stamped record, one that would be sitting in a government database the instant anyone tried to claim ownership interest in my house using that document. Victor Drake had no idea his forged paperwork was now flagged as evidence in a fraud investigation. He also had no idea that the moving trucks he'd already booked for November 3rd, the day after my closing, were about to arrive at a house that belonged to someone else entirely, guarded by people he'd never met, holding documents he couldn't argue with. I went to bed that night and for the first time in 3 months, I slept without waking up once. The Halden Meridian closing happened on November 2nd at 10 a.m. in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Wilshire Boulevard, and it took 11 minutes. Marcus sat beside me. Across the table, 2 attorneys representing the buyer reviewed a stack of documents I'd already read 4 times. Title transfer. Wire confirmation for the remaining balance, $2,100,000 landing in my account within the hour, the other half already secured in escrow since October. As is possession clause, effective immediately upon recording. I signed my name for the last time, as the legal owner of the Emerald Hills property at 10:08 a.m. Congratulations, one of the attorneys said, sliding a folder toward me. Recording will finalize with the county by end of day. I thanked them, shook hands, and walked out onto Wilshire Boulevard into a clear, dry November morning, the kind California does better than anywhere else in the country. I called Marcus from the sidewalk before he'd even reached his car. Confirm with the locksmith service for tomorrow morning, I said. 6 a.m. And the private security team we discussed. You're sure about the timing? Victor's movers are scheduled for 9 a.m., I said. I want everyone in place 3 hours before that. I didn't go back to the house that night. I stayed at a hotel in Santa Monica, and for the first time in months I ordered room service, and watched the ocean instead of watching my phone for another crisis. Chloe texted me twice. The first message asked where I was. The second, 4 hours later, asked if I could stop being dramatic, and come home so we could talk about the master suite situation like adults. I didn't answer either one. I was done negotiating around a house I no longer owned. At 5:40 a.m. on November 3rd, I stood across the street from the property with Marcus, watching the sky lighten over the hills. A commercial locksmith van pulled into the driveway at 5:58. 2 private security contractors from a licensed firm Halden Meridian had retained arrived at 6:15, professional, quiet, badges visible. At 7 o'clock, a representative from Halden Meridian's property management division arrived with the recorded deed, and the county stamped transfer documents in hand. At 8:47 a.m., a moving truck turned onto the street. Then a second one behind it. I watched Victor Drake step out of his sedan in a pressed shirt, already directing movers toward the front door like he owned the place, which, as far as he knew, he was about to. Chloe's car pulled in behind them at 8:52. She got out laughing at something on her phone, Julian beside her, both of them dressed like the day was a celebration. I stayed across the street. I wanted to watch this part happen without my face being the first thing they saw. Victor reached the front door first. He tried his key. It didn't turn. He tried it again, jiggling the handle, confused, before he noticed the new brass hardware around the lock, different from what had been there the day before. That's when the door opened from the inside. Two security officers stood in the entryway behind a man in a suit holding a clipboard. Behind them, a locksmith was still working on the side entrance. Victor stumbled backward, actually stumbled, like the ground had shifted. "This is a private residence," the man with the clipboard said. "You're currently on property owned by Halden Meridian Group, effective yesterday at 4:12 p.m. Pacific Time. If you have belongings inside, please state your name for the record. Otherwise, I'll need you to step off the premises." "There's been a mistake," Victor said. "My son's girlfriend has an ownership stake in this house. We have documentation. We're aware of a fraudulent quitclaim filing associated with this address," the man said, without raising his voice. "That filing has been referred to the county district attorney's office as part of an active forgery investigation. I'd strongly advise against presenting that document to anyone right now." I watched Cassandra's face change first. Then Julian's. Chloe just stood frozen on the driveway, phone still in her hand, staring at the movers who had already started backing the trucks away because nobody was signing anything to let them unload. That's when I crossed the street. "Elena," Chloe said, and for 1 second her voice sounded like it had when we were kids. "What is this? What did you do?" "I sold the house," I said. "On October 12th. 2 hours before you told me to pack my bags. You can't just sell our house." "It was never our house, Chloe. It was mine. I let you live in it because I loved you, not because you owned any part of it." I looked at Julian, who had gone very quiet, the confidence gone out of him entirely. "And you knew that. Which is why you needed a forged deed instead of just asking me." Victor tried one more time, his voice rising. "This family has rights." "Your family," I said, "has a $1.48 million judgment against you in Sacramento County that you've been trying to satisfy by taking equity out of a house that was never yours to mortgage. I know about the Elk Grove complaint. I know about the settlement. And Julian," I turned to him directly for the first time in over a year. "I know about San Diego. About the unauthorized transfers. About the NDA you signed instead of facing charges." Nobody said anything. The private security officers waited by the door, patient, unbothered, like this happened every day, because for a firm like Halden Meridian, it probably did. Cassandra was the one who finally broke. "Victor, where are we supposed to go? We already sold the Sacramento house." "The movers," her voice cracked. "We don't have anywhere else." That detail landed harder than anything I'd said. They'd sold their own home believing this one was already half-secured, banking on a forged document, and a 9-page deed filed by an unlicensed notary to carry them into a $4.2 million property with no resistance. They had nowhere else to go because they'd bet everything on a plan built on my forged signature. Chloe looked at me, and for a moment I saw real fear in her face, not for herself, but for what she'd helped build. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture her about the years I'd spent supporting her, or the housekeeper she'd humiliated in the rain, or the sister she'd chosen not to be for the last 14 months. I simply reached out and took the gate remote out of her hand, the one that still had my father's old keychain attached to it. "You told me to leave if I had a problem," I said. So I left. With the $4.2 million. I walked back to my car. Behind me, I heard Marcus calmly informing Victor Drake that the district attorney's office would likely be in contact regarding the notary filing, and that continued presence on the property could be treated as trespassing under California Penal Code 602. 6 weeks later, Martha Reyes and I had dinner at the same restaurant in Manhattan Beach where I'd once tried to warn Chloe about all of it. Denise Okafor's notary license was suspended pending a state investigation. The district attorney's office had opened a formal inquiry into the quitclaim filing, with Julian named as a person of interest for his role in producing the document. Victor and Cassandra Drake were living in an extended-stay hotel in Sacramento, their remaining assets tied up in the same judgment that had started this entire disaster. Chloe called me twice that month. I let both calls go to voicemail. Not out of cruelty, out of the simple recognition that some relationships need silence before they can become anything honest again. I bought a smaller house in Pacific Palisades that December, nothing extravagant, just for bedrooms and a view of the ocean instead of the hills. Martha comes by on Sundays now, and we cook together the way she used to cook for my parents. I don't know if Chloe and I will ever sit at the same table again. But I know this, I built something with my own hands twice in my life, a company, and a house, and I will never again let anyone convince me that loving someone means handing them the keys to either one.